My name is Nora Whitlock, and I'm 58 years old. 30 years ago, this town spat my name like poison. They called me a thief, a liar, a woman who destroyed everything she touched. And the worst part? They believed the woman who betrayed me my best friend. I left Claiborne that night with nothing but my shame and a promise. One day, I'd come back. Now I have. The same people who once watched me fall are living in the houses I own, working for the companies I built, and they don't even know it yet. I returned to the town that destroyed me not for forgiveness, not for closure, but to remind them that some ghosts don't come back to haunt. They come back to collect. As I gripped the steering wheel of my silver sedan and crossed the faded "Welcome to Claiborne" sign, a wave of nausea rose in my throat. 30 years since I swore I would never see this cursed town again. And yet here I was, rolling down the same cracked roads, past the same rusted streetlights that once illuminated the worst night of my life. Claiborne hadn't changed much. The streets were still lined with peeling paint and shuttered shops, and the salty wind from the coast carried the same damp bitterness that used to cling to my hair after long nights of crying. It was strange how a place could stand so still when time moved so cruelly forward. Everything looked smaller now, but the ghosts of my past felt larger than ever. Back then, I was just a 28-year-old architect, ambitious, naive, and foolishly trusting. I worked for Corbin Construction, the town's most reputable firm, and I believed I was building something meaningful there. Diane Corbin, my boss, was also my best friend. She was confident, charismatic, and ruthless in ways I admired. I thought she was my mentor, my ally, even my sister in spirit. I was wrong. I can still remember the morning everything collapsed. The police came into the office while I was drafting blueprints for a new marina. They said money had gone missing, hundreds of thousands from a development fund I had managed. Diane stood there, trembling with perfect timing, tears glistening in her eyes as she told them she wanted to believe I was innocent. But her eyes told the real story. She knew exactly what she was doing. By sundown, my name was ruined. The town papers called me a thief. My fiancé, Samuel, couldn't bear the humiliation and walked out without a word. Friends who had once shared wine and laughter with me crossed the street to avoid my gaze. Claiborne devoured me alive, one whisper at a time. I left that night with nothing but a suitcase and a fury that would take decades to cool. In another city, far away from these salt-stained streets, I rebuilt myself from the rubble. It took years of rejection, sleepless nights, and starting over more times than I can count. I lived in cheap apartments, worked for people who underestimated me, and clawed my way up in an industry that didn't welcome second chances. But piece by piece, I built a new life. A stronger one. I became a real estate developer. Not by chance, but by choice, because I wanted control. Control over what was built, who profited, and who lost. And with each success, I thought less and less about Claiborne. Or at least, I told myself I did. Then one day, a property listing crossed my desk, an industrial lot in a coastal town called Claiborne, up for sale after years of neglect. I laughed when I saw it. It felt like fate was knocking on my door, whispering, "Come see what's left." So, I did. But not as the broken woman who left. I came back as someone else entirely, the silent owner behind Renaissance Holdings, a name I chose with delicious irony. Through shell companies and quiet acquisitions, I bought half the town before anyone even realized it was happening. The old marina, the commercial block, the abandoned factory, all mine. And now, there was only one piece left. Corbin Construction, the company that destroyed me. The afternoon sun burned low as I parked outside their building. The sign was still there, faded but defiant. Corbin Construction Building, tomorrow. The words made me laugh bitterly. Tomorrow. I'd lost so many tomorrows because of them. I stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel under my heels sounding like thunder in my chest. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and old lumber. As I stood there, I could almost hear echoes of my younger self walking up those steps, heart full of hope and trust. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. I hadn't come here for nostalgia. I had come for justice. The town didn't know I owned most of it now. No one connected my new name, Nora Randall, to the disgraced woman who once lived here. I had been careful, meticulous even. Only a handful of lawyers and accountants knew the truth. Claiborne would learn in time, but not yet. First, I wanted to see what remained of the empire. Diane built on my bones. I walked slowly down the narrow sidewalk toward the office. The building's paint was flaking, the windows clouded with dust. I peered through the glass and froze. There she was, Diane Corbin. Her once golden hair had turned a brittle gray, cut short in a style that tried to look modern but only emphasized her exhaustion. She was on the phone, waving a folder in frustration, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Even from outside, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the bitterness around her mouth. The mighty Diane Corbin, still pretending to be in control. For a moment, I didn't move. I just watched her, trying to feel something: hatred, satisfaction, vindication, but instead, I felt strangely hollow. Maybe revenge doesn't fill the void. Maybe it just keeps you from falling into it. Then she turned slightly, her eyes catching the window's reflection. My breath hitched. She glanced up right at me, but there was no recognition. To her, I was just another stranger, maybe a curious passerby. And somehow, that stung more than I expected. I stepped back, steadying myself. 30 years ago, that woman could have destroyed me with a single lie. Now, I could destroy her with a single signature. But not yet. Not before she knew exactly who I was, and what she'd taken from me. I turned toward the street, the wind whipping against my coat as I walked back to my car. Every step felt heavier, but there was a strange comfort in the weight. It reminded me I was still standing. I glanced at the rearview mirror before driving off, catching one last glimpse of the Corbin sign swaying weakly in the wind. This town had swallowed me whole once, but I'd returned with sharper teeth. And tomorrow, Diane Corbin would learn that ghosts don't stay buried forever. As I pulled away, the reflection of her office disappeared in my side mirror, but the image of her face burned in my mind. She didn't recognize me today, but she will. The woman who ruined my life is now begging for investors. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the sound of waves crashing faintly beyond the window of the small seaside house I'd rented. Sleep had been an illusion. My mind had replayed the image of Diane in that office over and over, like an unfinished sentence echoing in my head. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping bitter coffee, staring at the folder my lawyer had sent overnight. Inside were the documents for the next phase of my plan, the quiet acquisition of Corbin Construction's debt through one of my subsidiaries. But before I signed anything, I needed to see the state of her empire with my own eyes. By 9 o'clock, I stood outside the Claiborne Business Center, a worn brick building where struggling companies came to beg for second chances. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had arranged an appointment through a fake corporate identity, Miss Randall, senior advisor to a group of private investors from the East Coast. The name carried just enough weight to open doors. The receptionist greeted me politely and ushered me toward the conference room. My heels clicked on the tiled floor, each sound reminding me how far I'd come from the girl who used to walk barefoot through construction dust with dreams of designing skylines. The conference room smelled faintly of stale coffee and desperation. Diane stood at the front, clutching a portfolio. Her once perfect posture had a slight slump now, her designer suit a little too tight at the shoulders. There were two men sitting at the long table, local businessmen who looked more curious than convinced. I quietly slipped into a seat at the far end, pretending to review some notes as Diane began her presentation. Her voice was the same commanding, persuasive, but laced with a new tension. Corbin Construction has been a cornerstone of Claiborne for 40 years, she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We've faced challenges, but we're positioned for a powerful comeback. Her tone was smooth, but I caught the subtle quiver beneath it. As she clicked through her slides, I noticed the cracks in her story. Half-finished developments, halted permits, unpaid contractors. The once thriving projects that had put Claiborne on the map were now decaying skeletons of her ambition. It was like watching the fall of a queen who refused to admit her crown had tarnished. Diane still had the same flair for manipulation, dodging questions, sweetening lies, masking failure with charm. I almost admired it, in a dark way. She spoke about a promising partnership with an undisclosed investment group that could rescue the company. I almost laughed aloud, knowing that the mysterious investor she referred to was, in fact, me. After the meeting, the other investors thanked her half-heartedly and left. I stayed behind, pretending to double-check my files. Diane noticed me and offered a practiced smile. "Miss Randall, isn't it? I'm so glad you could attend. Would you have a few minutes to talk privately?" Her tone was polite but strained. I agreed, and she led me into her office, once my office. The walls were bare where my framed blueprints used to hang. The desk was cluttered with paperwork, coffee stains, and stress. She motioned for me to sit, then closed the door behind us. "I'll be honest," she began, lowering her voice. "Corbin Construction has seen better days, but this town still believes in us. We just need the right investors, people who understand small-town potential." I studied her carefully. Her confidence was an act, and she was barely holding it together. Lines of fatigue framed her mouth, and a nervous flicker in her eyes betrayed the truth she was running out of time. "How bad is it?" I asked, pretending to be concerned. She sighed, leaning back. "We've had some setbacks, supply issues, slow permits, bad weather." The excuses came easily, as they always had. But beneath them, I could hear the real problem: incompetence. "The truth is, we've overextended. We just need liquidity to stabilize operations." Liquidity? I almost smirked. I had liquidity more than she could imagine, and soon, it would be hers no longer. A soft knock on the door interrupted us. A young woman stepped in, bright eyes, sleek ponytail, clipboard in hand. "Diane, I have the updated projections." Diane smiled briefly. "Thank you, Mara." Mara nodded at me politely before handing over the documents. She couldn't have been older than 25, eager but exhausted. "If you need anything, Miss Corbin, I'll be in the front office." "Actually," I said as she turned to leave, "I might have some questions later. I'm interested in understanding how things operate here." Mara smiled. "Of course, I'll be happy to help." After she left, Diane chuckled dryly. "Bright girl. Reminds me of myself when I started. Too ambitious for her own. Good." That sentence hit me like a blade wrapped in velvet. I forced a polite laugh, hiding the sting of recognition. As our conversation continued, I noticed how Diane still wielded half-truths like weapons. She spoke fondly of loyal employees, yet I'd heard from my contacts that she'd fired dozens without severance. She painted Claiborne as a town on the rise, but I'd driven through its silent streets that morning. The boarded windows told a different story. For the next hour, I let her spin her web. Every lie, every exaggeration, I quietly noted. My satisfaction grew with each passing moment, not out of cruelty, but because I realized how fragile her kingdom truly was. She'd built her empire on deceit, and it was finally cracking beneath her. When our meeting ended, Diane shook my hand. "I'm confident we can make this partnership work," she said, her grip tight, her eyes searching mine for approval. "I'll review everything with my team," I replied, smoothly. "You'll hear from us soon." As I stepped out of her office, Mara was at her desk, sorting through folders. She looked up and smiled. "So, what did you think?" "She's certainly passionate," I said carefully. Mara laughed softly. "That's one word for it. Truth is, she's desperate. The company's drowning, and she's pretending not to notice. Half the suppliers have stopped returning our calls." I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "And you stay through all that?" Mara shrugged. "I guess I still believe it can be saved, or maybe I just want to see how it ends." Her honesty disarmed me for a moment. There was something refreshingly candid about her, something I hadn't felt in years. Trust. But I reminded myself not to get sentimental. Everyone in Claiborne had a role to play in this story, and hers would come soon enough. She reached into her drawer and handed me a business card. "If you're serious about investing, you'll need to talk to her daughter. She handles most of the financial side now." Diane listens to her. I froze. "Her daughter?" Mara nodded. "Lena Corbin. She's the real brain behind the scenes. Without her, this company would have collapsed a year ago." The name echoed in my head like a bell. I hadn't known Diane had a daughter. A new generation of Corbins, another piece of the legacy I'd come to dismantle. I slipped the card into my coat pocket and smiled faintly. "Thank you, Mara. I'll be in touch." As I walked toward the exit, the afternoon light cut through the blinds, striping the hallway with gold and shadow. I paused at the doorway and looked back once more at the office that had once been mine. The sound of Diane's muffled voice floated through the walls, still lying, still pretending, still clinging to her crumbling throne. Outside, the sea breeze hit my face, cool and sharp. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. The air of Claiborne still carried the same bitterness, but now it tasted like victory slowly ripening. Diane Corbin was begging for investors, and soon, she'd discover that the one holding her lifeline was the same woman she had buried 30 years ago. I opened my eyes, glanced at the business card again, and whispered to myself, "Lena Corbin, let's see what kind of woman your mother raised." Her daughter looked at me like she knew my secrets. 3 days later, I found myself seated at a quiet restaurant overlooking the harbor, the kind of place where powerful people liked to have private conversations. The sea shimmered under a pale winter sun, and the sound of waves hitting the docks filled the silence around me. I'd chosen this spot carefully. It offered both privacy and a view of the town that was slowly coming under my control. I was there as Miss Randall, the poised and polished investor. My real name, my real history, and everything I once was, remained buried beneath layers of reinvention. Yet that morning, as I waited for Diane Corbin's daughter, I felt a tremor of something unfamiliar nervousness. At precisely noon, she arrived. Lena Corbin. She walked in with quiet confidence, the kind of self-assuredness that didn't need to announce itself. Her presence drew attention, not because she tried, but because she carried herself like someone who had already faced too much too young. Her dark hair was pulled into a sleek bun, and her gray suit was practical, not showy. When she spotted me, she hesitated for half a second, studying me as though trying to read between the lines of my face before offering a polite smile. "Miss Randall?" she asked, her voice calm but inquisitive. "Yes," I replied, standing to shake her hand. Her grip was firm, controlled, deliberate, a reflection of someone used to being underestimated. We ordered coffee in small plates, exchanging the kind of pleasantries business meetings required. But even as she spoke about the company's restructuring opportunities, her eyes never stopped scanning me. There was something analytical in her gaze, something that made me feel as though she could see more than I wanted to reveal. It was unsettling, and yet fascinating. "You've been looking into Corbin Construction for a while," she said casually, stirring her coffee. "May I ask what caught your interest?" I smiled, leaning slightly forward. "I have a personal interest in restoring local economies. Your company has a rich history in this town. I think there's potential here that's been overlooked." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "History?" she repeated quietly. "That's one way to describe it." Her tone shifted, and I caught the faint bitterness behind her professional mask. She looked away for a moment, gazing out toward the harbor where a few fishermen were unloading their catch. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "My mother built that company from the ground up. She's proud of it, but pride doesn't pay the bills. We've been struggling." I nodded slowly, pretending to empathize. "Every great company faces cycles. The key is knowing when to evolve." She studied me again, and for a fleeting second, I saw something almost vulnerable in her eyes. "You sound like you've been through something similar," she said. I took a breath, keeping my tone steady. "I've seen people lose everything because of the wrong partnerships. It teaches you who to trust and who not to." Her expression tightened. "Trust," she murmured, then smiled faintly. That's a rare word in my family's business. That was the first crack, the first real glimpse beneath the polished surface. Lena Corbin wasn't her mother's clone. She was sharper, quieter, and far more self-aware, and perhaps more dangerous because of it. As the lunch continued, she grew more candid. The conversation drifted from business strategies to personal philosophies. She admitted that she often disagreed with her mother's decisions, that she felt torn between loyalty and logic. There was a heaviness in her words that I recognized all too well, the burden of carrying someone else's mistakes. I listened carefully, hiding my growing fascination. This wasn't the spoiled heir I had expected. Lena had inherited Diane's ambition but not her deceit. She was intelligent, moral, but trapped in the same web her mother had spun decades ago. I could use that. Your company's financial history is impressive, I said smoothly. Though I did notice a few irregularities in some of the old reports, nothing major, just inconsistencies. Her eyes lifted to mine, sharp now. You've done your homework. I always do, I replied. Transparency is essential when considering an investment. Lena sighed, leaning back. There were incidents in the past. Funds that went missing. Projects that never broke ground. I was a teenager then, but I remember the tension. My mother never really explained what happened. I felt my pulse quicken, though I kept my expression neutral. I'd expected resistance or denial, not openness. Did she ever find out who was responsible? I asked, careful to sound merely curious. She shook her head. No. Or at least, that's what she told everyone. There was a woman, an architect, I think, who worked for her back then. My mom always said she was the one who caused the problem, but I never saw proof. I gripped my coffee cup tightly to steady my hands. The air seemed to thicken between us. Hearing her speak about me, unaware that the accused woman sat across the table, sent a ripple of both pain and triumph through me. Lena tilted her head slightly, watching me. You went quiet, she said softly. I'm just surprised. I answered quickly. It must have been hard for your mother. Lena gave a small, almost cynical laugh. My mother doesn't do hard. She does control. But that incident, it changed her. Sometimes I think she's been trying to outrun it ever since. Her honesty stunned me. For years, I'd imagined Diane surrounded by loyal enablers who worshipped her every word. But her own daughter saw through the facade. That revelation was more satisfying than any public humiliation could have been. Would you be open to showing me some of the older records? I asked carefully. It might help me understand how the company reached its current position. Historical insight is often the key to future investment. Lena hesitated, studying me again. There was suspicion in her gaze now, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. You remind me of someone, she said slowly. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something familiar. My heart skipped. I doubt we've met, I said lightly, forcing a small smile. I've been out of the region for decades. She nodded but didn't look convinced. Still, there's something about your eyes. My mom would notice too, I'm sure. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then she sighed, pulling her bag closer. If you really want to see those files, I can arrange it. I think you'll find them enlightening. She reached inside and drew out a thin folder, her fingers brushing the edges as though she wasn't sure she should let go. These are copies, she said. Old ledgers from before I joined the company. I've been trying to make sense of them myself. Maybe you'll spot something I missed. As she slid the folder across the table, I felt my throat tighten. My name, my forged name, was on those records somewhere. Proof of the lie that had stolen my youth, my career, my peace. I touched the folder gently, the paper cool against my fingers, and met her gaze. Thank you, Lena, I said softly. I'll take good care of them. She nodded, then hesitated. Her eyes lingered on my face, narrowing slightly. When she finally spoke, her voice dropped to almost a whisper. You look like someone my mom used to talk about, she said. Someone she hated. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and quiet, cutting deeper than she could ever know. The files confirmed everything she stole my life. That night, the air outside my rented house was heavy with fog, the kind that muffled sound and blurred light. The ocean was restless, the waves slapping against the rocks below like an impatient drumbeat. I sat at the small wooden table near the window, a single lamp casting a pool of yellow light across the papers spread before me. Lena's folder lay open, its contents whispering secrets I had waited half my life to hear. I had thought I was prepared, but as I began to read, I realized how wrong I was. The first page was a ledger, handwritten entries from over 30 years ago. The ink faded but still legible. I traced my eyes down the list of transactions until I saw it. My name, signed neatly beside a payment authorization for a project I never touched. I felt my breath catch. The signature was perfect, identical to mine, but I knew instantly it wasn't. Every loop, every line mimicked me with uncanny precision, yet something in the rhythm was wrong. Diane had forged my hand. As I turned the pages, the story unfolded with brutal clarity. The missing funds, the mysterious transfers, the fake accounts, all of it led back to Diane. She hadn't just blamed me, she had orchestrated everything. The money she'd claimed I stole had gone into shell accounts that later funded her own investments. She had used me as a scapegoat to hide her theft, saving herself and destroying me in one swift motion. My hands trembled as I flipped through the evidence. Decades of speculation became fact, every number confirming the truth I'd screamed into empty rooms long ago. I leaned back, pressing my palms against my face, but the tears came anyway, hot, relentless, and heavy with all the years I'd pretended not to care. I cried not just for what she had done, but for everything I had lost because of her lie. The career that might have soared, the home I might have built, the love that might have endured. Samuel's face flashed in my mind the way he had looked at me when he walked out, silent, believing her over me. I had hated him for that, but now I understood that Diane's poison had reached everyone. She'd stolen my future and twisted it into her own. For a long moment, I sat motionless, letting the grief wash over me until it began to cool into something sharper. Anger. Not the reckless rage of youth, but the deliberate, cutting fury of a woman who had waited too long to strike. I wiped my face, gathered the papers neatly, and stared out the window. The fog had thinned, revealing the faint outline of the town across the water, the same town that had watched me burn. I whispered into the quiet, "You took everything from me, Diane. Now, I'll take everything from you." The next morning, I called my legal team. They were the only people who knew my true identity behind Renaissance Holdings. I explained what I'd found calmly, clinically, like it was just another business deal. In reality, it was the foundation of my revenge. We began drafting the paperwork for a silent takeover, the kind that looked like coincidence from the outside. At the same time, I set another plan in motion, one less formal, more psychological. Through discreet channels, I let small rumors slip into the town's gossip circles. A wealthy developer from out of state was acquiring Claiborne properties. No one knew who, but speculation spread like wildfire. In small towns, whispers are stronger than press releases. Within a week, everyone was talking. At the grocery store, people murmured that Corbin Construction might lose its last big contract. At the diner, an old contractor said he'd heard the Corbins were going under, and Diane, the control addict, must have felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. I spent my days watching the town from a distance, sitting in my car near the harbor, observing the way people's expressions changed when they spoke her name. There was no loyalty left for her now, only fatigue. Years of broken promises had turned Claiborne against her, and I had merely nudged the first domino. Late one afternoon, I walked past the Corbin Construction office again. Through the window, I saw Diane pacing, phone pressed to her ear, her gestures frantic. Her assistant, Nora, sat nearby, typing nervously, glancing up with worry. Even from the street, I could sense the chaos. Diane's empire wasn't just crumbling, it was imploding. That night, I allowed myself a small glass of wine, the first in months. It wasn't celebration, it was acknowledgement. The scales were beginning to balance. Yet beneath the satisfaction, there was something else, a quiet ache that no victory could soothe. I thought of Lena. Her honesty had disarmed me. Her doubts about her mother had stirred something unexpected inside me. Compassion, maybe. Or recognition. I saw in her the version of myself that might have existed if someone had intervened before Diane's lies consumed me. Still, I reminded myself that this was war. And wars didn't end with empathy. Days passed, and the tension in Claiborne grew thicker. Diane's name was whispered with pity now, not admiration. Her charm no longer fooled anyone. Investors backed out, contractors withdrew. She must have wondered who was orchestrating it all, who was pulling the strings. I imagined her in her office, surrounded by papers, her world shrinking by the hour. Every night, I laid out my evidence again, pages, signatures, copies, proof of the truth that had haunted me for half a lifetime. Each document was a piece of my resurrection. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't feel like the woman who had lost everything. I felt like the one who had survived it. It was just past midnight when my phone rang. The sound startled me. It was rare for anyone to call that late. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Nora. The voice on the other end was breathless, urgent. Lena. I straightened in my chair. What's wrong? There was a pause, filled with the sound of her uneven breathing. You need to see what my mother just did. The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone for a long moment, the rhythmic crash of waves outside growing louder, almost violent. Whatever Diane had done, it was enough to make her own daughter call me in the middle of the night. My pulse quickened, the weight of the files heavy in my lap. Somehow, I knew this was only the beginning. The truth was out in the open now. And soon, so would the reckoning. I closed the folder, turned off the lamp, and looked out the window toward the dim glow of the town across the water. In that glow, I saw both my past and my vengeance waiting for me. Tomorrow I would find out what Diane Corbin had done and what it would cost her this time. She knew someone was coming for her, but she never guessed it was me. The next morning, Lena called again, her voice tight and trembling. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. Can we meet? She asked. Somewhere private. Her urgency left no room for hesitation, so I agreed. An hour later, we sat in a corner booth of a nearly empty cafe on the outskirts of town. The windows fogged slightly from the steam of our untouched coffee cups, and the air smelled faintly of rain and roasted beans. Lena's hands shook as she opened her laptop, turning it toward me. I found something, she whispered. My mother's been transferring money overseas, quietly. She's preparing to move funds to offshore accounts. I don't know why, but it's recent, within the last month. I stared at the screen, though I already knew what I was looking at. The numbers, the transfers, the shell accounts, it was all so predictable. Diane had always been a master at self-preservation. When the fire closed in, she'd rather burn everyone else than be caught in the flames. I leaned back slowly, feigning concern. That's serious, I said softly. Do you think she's planning to leave? Lena nodded, her jaw clenched. Maybe not physically, but financially, yes. She's moving everything. If she drains the company accounts, there'll be nothing left for anyone. Not for the employees. Not for the town. I folded my hands, studying her. She looked so much like the woman I used to be trying to make sense of betrayal she didn't yet fully understand. But unlike me, Lena still had a choice. I decided, in that moment, to guide her toward a truth that would hurt, but also free her. We can stop her, I said, but only if we act quickly. She looked up, eyes wide. How? I can use my position as an investor to access her financial departments. If she's moving assets, we'll see where they're going. Once we have proof, you can take control before she wipes the accounts clean. Lena hesitated. You'd really do that? I offered a calm, reassuring smile. I believe in this company's potential, and I believe in you. If you want to protect what your family built, you'll need to make hard choices. Ones your mother isn't strong enough to make anymore. Her eyes softened, gratitude mixed with confusion. She didn't know she was helping me build the final steps of Diane's downfall. It wasn't manipulation for greed, it was justice served through patience and precision. That evening, under my alias as Miss Randall, I arranged a confidential meeting with Diane. When she arrived, her once confident stride had turned into something restless and anxious. She wore her tension like a second skin, every movement rushed, every glance suspicious. "I'm glad you called," she said, sitting down. "Things are complicated right now. I've been under a lot of pressure." "I heard," I replied smoothly. Lena mentioned there were financial challenges. Her expression hardened for a moment. "Lena talks too much," she muttered, then sighed, catching herself. "I mean, she doesn't understand how business works. She's good-hearted, but naive. I've had to make decisions she wouldn't approve of." I tilted my head, watching her closely. "Sometimes protecting a company means doing what others won't," I said carefully, feeding her ego just enough. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Exactly. I knew you'd understand. You're different, Miss Randall. You see the bigger picture." Inside, I nearly laughed. 30 years ago, she'd said the same words to me, right before she forged my signature and destroyed my life. Now, she was unknowingly repeating history, only this time, the ending would be mine to write. We spoke for over an hour, and, with each passing minute, she lowered her guard. She confessed to temporary asset reallocations, claiming they were just precautions. I pretended to sympathize, gently offering to help her organize her offshore accounts more discreetly. By the end of our meeting, she agreed to give me limited access to her internal records, under the guise of an investment audit. That night, I sat once again at my seaside desk, laptop open, scrolling through Diane's empire. It was even worse than I'd imagined. Dozens of accounts, overlapping transfers, hidden investments. She was desperate, cornered, and bleeding money from every angle. I spent hours studying the structure until I found what I was looking for: the legal vulnerabilities. Small oversights, signatures that didn't match, unverified authorizations. Weaknesses that, with the right paperwork, could make everything she owned mine. By the end of the week, Renaissance Holdings quietly acquired controlling interests in 3 of Corbin Construction's largest assets. Each transaction looked legitimate, each paper trail spotless. Diane never saw it coming. Meanwhile, Lena and I continued our investor updates. She grew more distant from her mother, more aligned with me. Every conversation was another quiet nudge toward the inevitable. She began questioning Diane openly in meetings, asking about missing funds and discrepancies. Diane, paranoid and exhausted, lashed out, accusing Lena of betrayal. The fracture between them widened with every word. I watched from a distance, not with pleasure, but with grim satisfaction. I had lived that fracture once, believing in someone only to watch them turn monstrous under the weight of their own lies. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about breaking the cycle before it swallowed another generation. One evening, Diane called me unexpectedly. Her voice, usually sharp and commanding, now sounded small. "Miss Randall, I don't know who else to trust. Everyone's turning against me. My investors are pulling out, my daughter's questioning me, and there's a rumor someone's been buying up our properties." "Rumors spread easily in small towns," I said gently. She sighed heavily. "I've built everything in this town, everything, and now it's slipping away. Sometimes I think someone's doing this on purpose." I let a beat of silence pass, then said, "Maybe it's not too late to fix things. But to do that, you'll need to let someone help you manage your assets before it's all gone." She hesitated, then whispered, "I don't know why, but I trust you." It was almost poetic. The same woman who once ruined me now sought comfort from the very hands tightening around her empire. Over the next few days, Diane signed documents she barely read. Each one moved more of her holdings into temporary management under Renaissance Holdings, my company. By the time she realized what she'd done, it was already irreversible. Then, like clockwork, the panic set in. She called meetings with her lawyers, her accountants, her board, anyone who could explain why her name was disappearing from property deeds. I stayed quiet, watching from the background as her confidence eroded. The woman who once destroyed my life now stumbled through her own undoing. Her voice wavered in meetings, her staff began to doubt her, and Claiborne's gossip machine turned her name into a cautionary tale. It was on a Friday evening when my phone rang again. The number flashing across the screen made me pause. "Diane," I answered, keeping my tone calm. "Miss Corbin?" Her voice came through, trembling, furious. "They're saying you bought the old factory," she hissed. "The one I was negotiating for last month. Tell me that isn't true." I said nothing. Her breathing quickened. "Who are you really, Miss Randall?" The line crackled between us, filled with tension and disbelief. For the first time in 30 years, Diane Corbin sounded afraid. I looked out at the darkening sea, the reflection of the town's lights shimmering across the waves, and let the silence linger just long enough for her to feel the weight of it. "Maybe," I said quietly. "You already know." It was time to take off the mask. The evening air hung thick with tension as I stepped into the dimly lit restaurant overlooking the Claiborne harbor. The same sea that had witnessed my downfall now reflected the glow of my return. I'd chosen the location carefully neutral ground, elegant yet quiet, the kind of place where secrets could unravel behind fine wine and polite conversation. The maitre d' greeted me by my alias, Miss Randall, and led me to a secluded table near the back. The waiters moved silently, the faint hum of conversation filling the space with an almost deceptive calm. Tonight, masks would fall. Diane arrived 15 minutes late. I recognized her silhouette before I even saw her face. She walked in with forced confidence, the stride of a woman pretending she still owned the room. But the facade cracked under the weight of exhaustion. Her once polished appearance was fraying at the edges, her makeup slightly smudged, her hands trembling as she removed her coat. When her eyes met mine, I saw confusion flicker there first, followed quickly by relief. She still thought I was her lifeline. "Miss Randall," she said, her voice brittle but steady. "I'm sorry for being late. Things have been chaotic lately." "I can imagine," I replied, gesturing for her to sit. "Claiborne seems to be changing quickly these days." She laughed weakly, a sound more like a sigh. "That's one way to put it. Every time I think I've stabilized things, something else collapses. It's like the ground itself is shifting beneath me. Maybe it's just revealing what was already weak," I said gently. My words deliberate, my tone calm. I watched her flinch slightly, unsure whether to take it as sympathy or criticism. I wanted her off balance, uncertain, curious, vulnerable. We ordered wine. She chose the most expensive bottle, clinging to old habits of control, of pretending that money and image still mattered. As we sipped, I began steering the conversation toward the past. Not directly, but with surgical precision. "You've built quite an empire," I said. "Few people manage to sustain something so long in a town like this." Her shoulders stiffened. "Built. Yes. Sustaining it is another story. It takes sacrifice." I tilted my head. "Sacrifice. That's a heavy word. Whose sacrifice? Though yours or someone else's?" Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp now, searching. "I'm not sure I follow." "You know," I said casually, tracing my finger around the rim of my glass, "sometimes when we make choices to protect ourselves, we hurt others without realizing it. And sometimes, we realize it and just pretend we didn't." Diane shifted in her seat. "That's quite philosophical for a business dinner." "Maybe," I replied, smiling faintly. "But business and conscience often overlap more than people think." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a rare crack of honesty, she whispered, "You remind me of someone I used to know. She was too idealistic for this world, thought honesty was enough to survive in it. Poor woman, life taught her differently." My pulse slowed, heavy and deliberate. "What happened to her?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "She destroyed herself," Diane said, taking another sip of wine. "Or maybe she let others destroy her. Hard to tell the difference sometimes." The words hit me like a cold wind. I leaned forward slightly, my voice low but clear. You mean Nora Whitlock? The glass in her hand paused mid-air. You've heard of her? I've heard the story, I said softly, though I think the version you told people might differ from the truth. Her expression hardened. She was a thief. She cost me everything. I stared at her for a long moment, letting silence fill the space between us. Then, without breaking eye contact, I reached up and slowly removed my glasses. The disguise wasn't elaborate, but it had always been enough: a different haircut, a new name, the armor of time. Yet the moment our eyes met without barriers, I saw the exact second she recognized me. Her face drained of color, her lips parted soundlessly, her body frozen like a statue cracking from within. "Hello, Diane," I said quietly. "It's been a long time." For a moment, there was only the sound of waves outside and the faint clatter of dishes from another table. Then she exhaled shakily. "No," she whispered. "No, this isn't possible." "Oh, it's very possible," I said. "I told you once that the truth has a way of surfacing. I guess you just didn't expect it to walk back into your life with your company's keys in its hand." She leaned forward, her voice trembling. "What do you want?" "Everything you took from me," I said simply, "and everything you built on top of it. Consider this poetic symmetry. Your lies built your fortune, and now the truth will dismantle it." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were the kind that came from fear, not remorse. "Nora, please," she whispered. "You don't understand. I had no choice. I had debts, pressure. You were young, ambitious, naive. You wouldn't have survived in this business. I did what I had to." "No," I said softly. "You did what was convenient. You framed me because you could. You sacrificed my life for your own ambition. And you let me rot while you thrived." Diane covered her face with her hands, trembling. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I've made mistakes. I've paid for them every day since." I wanted to believe her. For one fleeting moment, I almost did. But then I remembered the years of silence, the humiliation, the loneliness. I thought of how she'd watched my life burn and never once reached out to stop it. "I didn't come here for an apology," I said finally. "I came here to end this story on my terms." Her eyes widened. "You'll ruin me." "You already ruined yourself," I replied. "I just cleaned up the paperwork." I leaned back, letting my words sink in. "But I'm not without mercy. I'll let you keep one thing: the house you live in. You'll need somewhere to remember what you lost. But if you ever try to set foot in business again, if you so much as buy a plot of land, I'll take that too." Her lip trembled. "You wouldn't." I met her gaze. "You don't know me as well as you think." For the first time, Diane Corbin, the woman who once ruled this town, looked utterly defeated. She reached across the table as if to touch me, but I stood before her fingers met mine. "Goodbye, Diane," I said quietly. "You should have known the past never stays buried." I turned to leave. The restaurant felt colder now, the weight of decades slipping off my shoulders with every step. I walked past the flickering candles, past the curious glances, until I reached the door. Just as I stepped into the night air, a soft voice behind me stopped me in my tracks. "I thought I'd find you here." I turned slowly. Lena stood in the shadows near the entrance, her face pale but resolute. "How much did you hear?" I asked, my voice low. "Enough," she said quietly. "Enough to know who you really are." The wind off the harbor howled softly between us, carrying with it the sound of the waves and the echo of everything that had just shattered. Her daughter didn't see a villain, she saw justice. For a long moment, Lena and I stood outside the restaurant, the cool night air pressing between us like a fragile barrier. The lights from the harbor shimmered across the water, reflections rippling as if echoing the turbulence inside me. I had expected fury, disgust, betrayal, anything but the quiet steadiness in her eyes. She looked neither angry nor frightened. She simply looked resolute. "I heard everything," she said finally. "I followed my mother here because she's been unraveling, and I needed to know why." Now I do. I took a breath, uncertain whether to speak or walk away. Lena, whatever you think, she cut me off gently. I think you did what had to be done. Her words disarmed me completely. I'd braced myself for confrontation, for accusations, for the weight of another generation's anger. Instead, she offered understanding, the one thing I hadn't prepared for. Your mother destroyed my life, I said quietly. I didn't expect you to forgive me for what I just did to her. Lena shook her head. You didn't destroy her. She destroyed herself years ago. You just made everyone else see it. The breeze lifted her hair as she spoke, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a hint of the woman she could become, a woman forged in truth, not in shadows. We walked along the pier in silence, the sound of our footsteps blending with the soft rhythm of the tide. The restaurant's glow faded behind us, replaced by the faint hum of the town preparing for sleep. I wanted to say something, to explain that revenge never feels as victorious as it looks on paper, but Lena spoke first. I always knew something wasn't right, she said. When I was a child, my mother would go quiet whenever your name came up. She used to call you a thief, a traitor. But she said it like she was trying to convince herself. When I got older and saw the missing records, I started wondering who the real villain was. I looked at her, surprised by her candor. And yet you stayed. She was my mother, Lena said softly. You don't stop loving someone just because they lie. You just learn to live with the disappointment. Her words struck something deep in me, something raw and painfully familiar. I had lived decades trying to unlove the memory of a town that betrayed me, trying to unfeel the shame someone else had created. Maybe Lena was fighting a similar battle. Lena, I said gently, don't let her mistakes shape you. The line between ambition and cruelty is thinner than people realize. Once you cross it, it's hard to come back. She met my gaze, her expression solemn. That's why I need your help. I frowned. My help? She nodded. You rebuilt yourself from nothing. You exposed her truth without turning into her. I want to rebuild what's left of the company, not to save her name, but to redeem it. To make something honest out of what's left. The sincerity in her voice both moved and unsettled me. For years, I had dreamed of dismantling Corbin Construction, not reviving it. Yet now, this young woman, the daughter of my enemy, was asking me to guide her towards something new. I don't know if I can trust you, I said slowly. You carry her name, her legacy. I'm not her, Lena replied firmly. I want to prove that. Her determination reminded me of my younger self, the version of me that had believed integrity could withstand corruption. I studied her for a long moment before speaking again. If we do this, it won't be easy. The town won't forgive either of us overnight. I don't want forgiveness, she said. I want a fresh start. Those words lingered in the air like a quiet promise. Weeks passed, and our uneasy alliance began to take form. Together, we met with the remaining employees of Corbin Construction. Many were skeptical at first, but when Lena announced that the company would be restructured under a new name, Whitlock & Co., their doubts softened. She insisted on naming it after me, as if rewriting the story itself. I resisted the idea at first, but she argued it was the only way to set things right. People need to know the truth, she told me. They need to see who really built this town. And slowly, they did. Word spread through Claiborne that Nora Whitlock, the woman once branded a thief, had returned not as a ghost of scandal, but as a leader. It began subtly at first. A few polite nods at the cafe, a handshake from a contractor who had once refused to speak to me. Then came the apologies, awkward, halting, genuine. One afternoon, as I walked through the newly renovated Main Street, a woman stopped me. It was Mrs. Hollis, who used to work at the post office when I was young. She looked older, smaller somehow, her voice trembling. Nora, she said. I'm sorry. We all were wrong about you. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I simply smiled and said, we were all wrong about a lot of things. The apology didn't erase the years, but it softened something in me I hadn't realized was still hard. Whitlock & Co. began to flourish. We prioritized restoration projects, rebuilding the very structures that had fallen under Diane's neglect. Lena handled the business logistics with precision, while I focused on design and development, the craft I had once loved before it became a weapon against me. Working side by side, we created something neither of us could have built alone. Yet even as success grew around us, peace remained elusive. Every achievement reminded me of what had been stolen, and every act of redemption came with the shadow of memory. I often caught myself looking out across the harbor, thinking about the years that could have been. I'd won the battle, but the war within me was quieter, deeper, harder to end. One evening, Lena and I stood outside the new office building, a clean, modern structure where the old Corbin sign had once hung. The town's lights twinkled in the reflection of the glass doors, and for the first time, Claiborne looked alive again. "You did it," Lena said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "No," I corrected softly. "We did it." She smiled. "You could leave now, start fresh somewhere else. But you stay. Why?" I looked toward the ocean, the horizon stretching endlessly. "Because peace doesn't come from running. It comes from facing the ghosts and knowing they can't touch you anymore." She didn't reply, just nodded slowly, understanding more than I said. That night, when I returned to my seaside home, the world felt still. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the tide slide in and out. For the first time in years, I felt the faint stirrings of something close to contentment, fragile but real. Then, a soft thud broke the silence. A white envelope had been slipped under the door. No return address. My name handwritten on the front in careful script. I frowned, picked it up, and opened it. Inside was a single photograph, aged, creased, familiar. Samuel and I, standing on last, the old pier, smiling under the sunlight of a world that no longer existed. Behind it, a note written in the same handwriting, "He's back in town." The cup in my hand trembled slightly, the warmth seeping through my fingers as I stared at the picture. The ghosts I thought I'd buried weren't done with me yet. The man who abandoned me wanted a second chance. The morning after I found the envelope, the photograph stayed on the table where I'd left it, catching the pale light that filtered through the curtains. I told myself it didn't matter that Samuel belonged to another life, a version of me that had been buried with my innocence. But no matter how many times I looked away, my eyes always found their way back to it. The smile on my face in that old picture felt like a stranger's. I wondered if he'd changed as much as I had. It didn't take long for him to find me. Small towns have long memories and short secrets, and within 2 days, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, there he was, older, worn, but unmistakably him. His once dark hair had turned mostly gray, and the confidence that used to define him had softened into humility. For a moment, neither of us spoke. 30 years of silence filled the space between us like fog. "Nora," he said finally, his voice low and uncertain. "I didn't think you'd answer." "I almost didn't," I replied, my hand still on the door. He gave a small, rueful smile. "You look different, stronger." "Life tends to do that," I said, stepping aside. "Come in, Samuel." He hesitated, then crossed the threshold, his eyes scanning the modest but carefully kept space. It was nothing extravagant, just a quiet home by the sea, but everything in it was mine. I had built it without him, without anyone. "I heard what happened," he said as I poured us tea. "About Diane. About the company. The whole town's talking." I sat opposite him, keeping my expression neutral. It came back to gossip?" He shook his head. "I came back because I owed you the truth." I wanted to laugh at that 30 years late, and suddenly he owed me the truth. But something in his face stopped me. He looked fragile, almost haunted. I could see the weight he carried in the slump of his shoulders. He took a breath, his voice shaking slightly. "When the scandal broke all those years ago, Diane came to me before it hit the papers. She told me you'd stolen from her, that she'd tried to protect you but couldn't cover for you anymore." I was angry, humiliated. I believed her. The words stung, even though I'd known them all along. Hearing him admit it made the betrayal fresh again. You didn't even ask me, I said quietly. You just left. He closed his eyes, his regret visible in every line of his face. I told myself I needed proof, but really, I just didn't want to face what it would mean if she was lying. I took the easy way out. I studied him for a long moment. The young man I remembered had been proud, untouchable, always sure of himself. This man sitting before me was the opposite, older, humbler, aware of his own failures. So why now? I asked finally. Why come back after all this time? He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a letter creased, faded, but carefully kept. She did it to me too, he said simply. 10 years after you left, she offered me a contract for a housing project. It was supposed to save my company. Instead, she backed out halfway through, accused me of breaching the deal, and took everything. My business went under. My reputation was ruined. Sound familiar? I took the letter from him, reading the name at the bottom of the contract, Diane Corbin. Even now, her signature looked the same. Confident. Practiced. I lost everything, he continued. And when I heard what you'd done, how you'd exposed her, how you'd rebuilt, it's what she destroyed, I knew I had to see you. Not to beg for forgiveness, just to tell you that I finally understand. His words sank deep, stirring emotions I hadn't expected to feel again. Anger, grief, nostalgia, all tangled into something I couldn't name. I wanted to hate him, but the truth was, he looked like someone who had already punished himself more than I ever could. I don't know what you expect from me, I said softly. Nothing, he replied. I just wanted you to know that I was wrong. And if there's any way I can make things right, I'll do it. I looked out the window at the town below the streets I'd reclaimed, the skyline that now bore my name. You can't make the past right, Samuel. None of us can. We can only live with what we did. He nodded slowly. Then maybe I can help with what comes next. I turned back to him. What makes you think I need your help? Because I've seen what greed and lies can do to a town, he said. You've rebuilt Claiborne's foundations, but it needs more than buildings to survive. It needs fairness. It needs someone who cares about the people, not just the profits. His words caught me off guard. For years, I had thought of my mission as vengeance wrapped in justice. But lately, since Lena's partnership, it had started to feel like something else, like restoration. Could he really be part of that? Why should I trust you again? I asked. You walked away when I needed you most. He met my gaze steadily. Because I walked away once, and I've regretted it every day since. I can't change what I did, but I can spend the rest of my life proving that I learned from it. There was something raw and honest in his voice that reminded me of the man I'd once loved. The man who had believed in my dreams before the world tore them apart. I didn't answer right away. I didn't forgive him either, but I didn't close the door, and that, perhaps, was enough. We walked along the beach later that evening, the tide low and the horizon tinted gold. For the first time in decades, it didn't feel like the past was chasing me. It felt like it was finally catching up and asking to be understood. Samuel stopped and looked out at the water. Do you still think about what could have been? I smiled faintly. Sometimes. But I've learned that some things are better left in the past. He nodded, his expression peaceful. Then maybe we can build something new. Not what we lost. Something better. I didn't answer. I simply watched the waves roll in. The town lights flickering behind us. For the first time, I realized I didn't need revenge anymore. I'd already won. What I needed now was purpose. When we returned to my house, the sky had turned dark. I turned to say goodnight, but the look on Samuel's face made me pause. His eyes were fixed on something behind me. Nora, he said, slowly, his voice tight. Do you smell that? I turned, the faint scent of smoke reaching me before I saw it, the glow flickering in the reflection of my window, the distant crackle growing louder. My heart seized. Lena came running down the path, her face pale, her breath ragged. Nora! She shouted. Your house! It's on fire! The words hit me like a blow. I turned toward the orange light rising against the night sky, the smoke curling upward like the ghost of everything I thought I'd finally left behind. From the ashes of my past, I built my own empire. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the night sky above the harbor was painted orange and gold, the air heavy with smoke and the bitter scent of burning wood. My house, the quiet sanctuary I had built as a symbol of independence, was engulfed in flames that twisted upward like angry ghosts. I stood in the gravel driveway, frozen, watching the fire devour everything I had created. The crackling sound of the blaze echoed through the coastal wind, mingling with the voices of firefighters shouting orders and the distant sirens wailing through Claiborne's narrow streets. Lena was beside me, her eyes wide and glistening with tears. "We tried to call sooner," she said breathlessly, her voice trembling. "It spread too fast." I didn't answer. Words felt useless against the sight before me, the walls collapsing in on themselves, the memories melting into ash. Samuel stood a few feet away, his face illuminated by the flickering light, his jaw tight with disbelief. "It's gone," he whispered, as if saying it aloud might make it real. I should have cried. 30 years ago, I would have. But instead, I felt strangely still, as though I'd been emptied out and left with only clarity. The flames danced across the reflection in my eyes, consuming not just wood and glass, but the remnants of the woman I used to be. The house had been more than shelter, it had been my symbol of survival, my quiet declaration that I had rebuilt what Diane had taken. Now, it was gone. By dawn, nothing remained but a blackened skeleton and the faint hiss of cooling embers. The fire chief approached, his face lined with fatigue. "We think it was intentional," he said carefully. "Accelerant was found near the back entrance. Could be arson." I looked past him, toward the smoldering remains. "Do you know who did it?" He shook his head. "Not yet. We'll investigate." But I didn't need proof. In my heart, I already knew. Diane. It reeked of her desperation, her need to strike back even as her empire crumbled. Still, there was no evidence, only instinct. And after all this time, instinct wasn't enough for justice. Lena wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, her touch hesitant but sincere. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You've lost everything." I looked at her, my voice calm but steady. "No, Lena, I've lost a house, not everything." She frowned, confused, but even I was surprised by the words. Because as the smoke drifted over the town, I realized that revenge had been my prison all along. Every victory, every move I'd made since returning to Claiborne, had been driven by anger. I had rebuilt my life not out of hope, but out of spite. The fire, cruel as it was, had stripped me bare again, forced me to see what truly mattered. When the investigation dragged on with no suspects, I didn't press it. Let the town gossip. Let them wonder if Diane had gone too far. For the first time, I didn't care about retribution. I was tired of fighting ghosts. Instead, I focused on rebuilding, but this time, not for myself alone. Lena and Samuel refused to leave my side. Together, we began planning a new project, one that would breathe life back into Claiborne. The town had been decaying for years under the weight of corruption and neglect. Empty storefronts lined Main Street, and people had grown used to disappointment. I wanted to change that. We decided to transform the burned remains of my home into something new. A community center where people could gather, learn, and rebuild together. When I announced the plan publicly, the townspeople were hesitant at first, uncertain whether to trust me. But when they saw Lena by my side, they began to believe. The daughter of Diane Corbin, standing beside Nora Whitlock, the woman her mother had destroyed, was proof that some stories could end differently. Samuel used his experience to bring in honest investors, and soon construction began. For the first time in decades, Claiborne's air buzzed with the sound of renewal hammers, striking, saws cutting, children laughing nearby. Weeks turned into months, and slowly the town began to change. The marina reopened, the market filled with vendors again, and the new Whitlock & Co. offices became a symbol of integrity and progress. People who had once turned their backs on me now nodded with quiet respect when I passed. A few even stopped to apologize, their words awkward but sincere. I accepted each one without bitterness. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about the other person, it was about freeing yourself from the weight they left behind. One afternoon, as the new community building neared completion, Samuel and I stood outside watching the workers paint the final touches. "You've done something remarkable here," he said. "You didn't just rebuild, you healed this place." I smiled faintly. "No, Samuel. We did it. Lena, you, everyone who believed change was possible. This was never about revenge. It was about proving that we could build something good on broken ground." He looked at me for a long moment. "Do you ever think about Diane?" "Every day," I admitted. "But not with hatred anymore, just pity. She spent her whole life chasing power, and in the end, she lost everything that mattered." He nodded. "And you?" I turned to look at the town, the skyline that bore, the mark of my redemption. I learned that power means nothing without integrity. That building something real takes courage, not cruelty. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone in my new office at the top of Whitlock & Co. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and crimson. From that window, I could see every corner of Clayburn, the marina, the restored streets, the bustling life that had returned. The town that once destroyed me now lived and thrived under my watch. I whispered softly to myself, "They once took everything from me. But now, everything they built belongs to me, and for the first time, I finally know what to do with it." It wasn't arrogance. It was peace, the kind that comes when you've fought your last battle and survived every scar. As I turned off the light and gathered my things, a notification on my phone caught my eye, an alert about an upcoming property auction. I scrolled through the listings, not really paying attention, until one name made me pause. Diane Corbin Estate foreclosure sale. Her house, the same one she had fought to keep, the last piece of her pride. Without hesitation, I forwarded the listing to my lawyer. "Buy it," I wrote simply. "Anonymous purchase. Full amount." A week later, the deed arrived in my office mail. I held it in my hands for a long time, feeling the strange satisfaction that came not from vengeance, but from closure. I didn't plan to live there or tear it down. I just wanted to know that the last trace of Diane Corbin's empire now belonged quietly to the woman she tried to erase. That night, as I walked along the pier, the waves lapping gently at the wooden posts, I thought about everything: the fire, the lies, the loss, and the second chances. Clayburn glowed under the soft streetlights, alive again. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like an exile. I felt like its keeper. I had come back to destroy the town that broke me. But, somewhere along the way, I had saved it instead. Clayburn once buried me in lies, but I dug myself out with truth. I came back seeking revenge, but I found something far greater: peace. The people who once watched me fall now walk on the roads I rebuilt. I don't hate them anymore, because their cruelty made me unbreakable. In the end, I didn't just reclaim my past, I became everything they said I'd never be. If Nora's story touched your heart, don't forget to share it. Someone out there might need to hear it too. Like and subscribe for more stories of women who rise when the world tries to break them. And tell me this: if life gave you a chance to walk back into the place that once destroyed you, would you take it?